Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined as always by Nate Atkins, coming to you live from the Colts facility. This is the finale for the offseason of the Colts Cover 2 podcast because it's Colts wrapped up today. They wrapped up their offseason a little bit early. They finished their mandatory minicamp. I think a lot of teams actually finished their mandatory minicamp today, just kind of watching around social media as other reporters finish stuff up. Normally, these are light days. It was a light day for the Colts. There was a quarterback competition that it involved Kwity Paye versus Blake Freeland versus EJ Speed. No, I am not saying the wrong names. Yes, Nate will break down their throwing motions later in the pod. But we have to get to the real news because that's the thing is normally this is a very light day. It was not a light day today, mainly because of the most important thing of this offseason. The health of Anthony Richardson's right shoulder. He did not throw with his right hand today. He was limited in practice the day before. Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson both said that he's just got some soreness in the shoulder. They decided to hold off on him. They don't sound concerned, or they're trying not to sound concerned. What is your level of concern with Anthony Richardson?
My concern right now is about as low as what they're expressing. It's just around zero or maybe just above. And my concern is entirely tied to what I see and sense out of Anthony on an emotional level. Is since getting to know him more than a year ago, going down to his pro day first off, and then obviously he gets drafted here, and all throughout everything, we saw such highs and lows out of him last year, from the draft to becoming a starter to making big plays against the Rams to the season-ending injury. He wears every emotion on his sleeves, and so ever since this arm issue started yesterday in practice, like I had the binoculars out and I was just like watching every expression that he had. And pretty much the way it went down is he was out there throwing in a team setting, and he went to do a check down to Jonathan Taylor and just sailed the throw. And he was upset about that and starts stretching the arm out a ton. And he was like frustrated that they took him out and that this was happening. But the entire time from then until all the way through today, where he was kind of a spectator in pads or in a jersey, he did not look like he was upset at all. I mean, he looked like annoyed he wasn't out there, but you saw all that same kind of joking and silliness. He's dancing in the stretching line as they're playing his rap song over the speakers. He's celebrating with teammates. Like the Anthony that I think we've gotten to know here, like he's crushed by any actual injury because he's been through some really tough times. And so not only that, but when he came out and talked to us, I mean, he really felt like, just hearing him talk felt like that easy breezy Anthony that we see pretty much all the time outside of when he was actually hurt in those early, before surgery last year. So, right now I understand the skepticism some fans have as far as like the way that have talked about quarterback injuries over the years. And there is, a tendency for NFL coaches to either be shady or just like downplay things until they have to, they have a game to suit up for. But I just really didn't sense it as anything other than Anthony, like he said at multiple points before this, that there was going to be some soreness. There were going to be some days where he wasn't 100%. And I think just trying to go 3 straight days here at these practices, it made it sore. And so to me, I think as much as they preach caution, and they're preaching it to him all the time, it just didn't make sense for them to have him throw on a sore arm for the 3rd day of a veteran minicamp practice that was so lighthearted that they ended it and spent like 20 minutes at the end having guys like EJ Speed and Blake Freeland and Kwity Paye throw. And maybe that's factoring into my concern, because some of those throws were pretty good from Blake Freeland and EJ Speed especially. No offense to Kwity, he wasn't quite on the level of these guys who played high school quarterback, but it looks like the Colts have some depth at quarterback too. So maybe that's why I'm a little less concerned.
Yeah, let's real quick interlude. Let's rank the motions. Let's rank the throwing. See, that's EJ Speed won the competition.
Yeah.
Do you have him in your 1 slot?
I do, because
I don't.
I know it's really tough. He had the most complete package of like the accuracy, but I'll say I liked Blake Freeland's motion. Like Blake Freeland got some zip on that ball. Like
Blake Freeland throws a very pretty ball.
It's a very pretty ball. It was almost like he was just aiming it like a little too high every time. So EJ like was better at actually executing the assignment. I don't know. It's one of those like EJ feels like a higher floor quarterback, but it's like you could develop like a like the playground version of Anthony Richardson, maybe probably without the legs, but the arm side of it was like very pretty deep ball.
I like that. Yeah, I've got Freeland, Speed, and then Quiddy. Speed had not only won it, but he had the highlight throw, at least for me, where the way they were doing this was they were lined up on like the 20 or 25, and then there was basically a golf cart with a tackling dummy on the back of it, and they were supposed to hit the tackling dummy. And there were two people in the cart, both wearing football helmets, and then giant pads that would normally be on the ground were above that or on each side. And EJ managed to get a ball over the pad and directly into the helmet of one of the people driving. So I apologize to that person that I took pleasure in seeing you get hit in the head, but it was pretty funny.
It was funny because they were like trying to do everything to hide that person's helmet. So that's why like EJ's precision was impressive.
Oh, so you're saying EJ hit the helmet on purpose?
Yeah. It seems like something EJ would do for fun, just to be funny. But yeah, it's when they had Blake Freeland stepping up there. I'll be honest, I did not know he played high school quarterback, but I get it after watching. I get it. That was incredible.
High school basketball star too. It sounded like.
Yeah, he's got that versatile skill set. It's more. You play left side of the line, right side of the line, basketball.
Quarterback in a pinch.
He's basically the Anthony Edwards of offensive linemen.
I getting back to the more serious stuff. I'm a little more concerned than you are, I think, with Richardson. I think your points are valid. There's just like the nagging. When I say a little more concerned, I don't mean I'm like very concerned at all, really. But there's just like the nagging wonder of, they had said some stuff about he's going to take all the reps, that kind of thing. I think shoulder soreness is probably to be expected after major surgery. Shoulders are super complicated, that kind of thing. It's just like a little data. It's like the first data point that hasn't been super positive.
Yeah.
And so I think that like takes me from like I'm not thinking about this at all to like, oh, we're going to tuck that in the back of my head. It's the first data point where it's been like, because when we first got out here, I mean, you were still working on Indy 500 stuff, but like the first time we saw him throw, our big takeaway was, oh, the arm strength's there.
Yeah. No, I was out here that day, and yeah, I get what you're saying, because that day I remember we had a pod and we said like, well, those concerns are in the past. And so this is fair. I am contradicting myself a little bit to just say I'm not concerned at all when he had to miss basically practice and a half for it. Yeah, I mean, I guess it just some of it, I don't know. It made me think that like it was unrealistic to think this was just a switch goes off and he's 100% through it in terms of like that full like the shape of the shoulder, getting it like conditioned really is kind of what he needs. To me, it's sort of like a pitcher building back up, where you see those guys come out of missing time in Major League Baseball, and like even though they're like healthy, there's nothing lingering health-wise with their arms. They go out there and they go on rehab assignments where they'll throw like 20 pitches one game, and then they'll throw like 50 pitches. To me, this feels more like that, where you take so much time off of using that muscle that can fire some of the highest velocity passes you'll see, and then you're asking him to just go do it again. And everything about these practices is light. Like everything here is lighter than anything you'll really do on a football field, except that one thing, which is you use that arm to throw that ball and throw deep passes. And
Jim Bob Cooter basically called it a passing camp.
Yeah.
Like he used that actual nomenclature. He used passing camp, which is that I mean, that's more honest than most people are about. Than most coaches are about what goes on at OTAs and mandatory minicamp. He's right. It's mostly a passing camp. The linemen, they're here for conditioning and vibes and friendship.
And running backs are just sort of doing.
Running backs are here to catch the bat. Running backs are here to catch the football. That's what they're here for.
Which is just funny for someone like Trey Sermon. I don't think that's going to be a lot of his role, but that was what it is here. I will say the thing with Anthony that is like, for most of these other players, it's like, well, they're in summer break. Unless you're allowed to, and you're going to train every second of every day. A lot of these players are going into a very like light mode, vacation-y mode. It's their one big break before they go into training camp. For Anthony, though, the quarterbacks and receivers are good to meet up and throw. Last year they went down to Florida. This year they're not entirely sure where they're going to go yet. But Anthony described it as like that's our second mini camp. So they are going to be doing more of this. This isn't as simple as like this is the last day he had. And I don't know if that makes it better or worse, because in some ways it's like it's not like he has to just sit on this image of his arm for 6 weeks and then figure out what it is in training camp. But I'm also, I don't know. I assume they're not going to throw back-to-back days, probably just to eliminate any risk of soreness. They're going to have a plan for sure for it. It's not going to be like you or me grabbing a football and going onto the backyard. But it does show you that like they've got more work they're going to need to do. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to hear. I don't know, get through that period and just hear how it went, I guess, because I don't know. His vibe was more annoyed than anything. I thought it was just like he's as ready as anybody to be over this, and I can understand why. Like I can't imagine it was very fun for fans to like be following that stuff. And I mean, we were nervous too. It's like nobody wants to have to deal with anything more with this shoulder, and it's like I try to keep laying out there. Anthony's style is going to invite some injury concerns throughout his career. That's what running quarterbacks do. But this specific one, it would be so nice if we could just kind of put it on the back burner. And this specific shoulder injury, like I would love to stop dealing with. And I think that was his frustration, was just like, come on, let's move past it already. And somehow with the soreness, we're still kind of there.
Yeah. The other thing about Anthony sitting out is Anthony Richardson, like they didn't do much. Like it wasn't like I think there was maybe like one period of throwing or 2 periods of throwing. It wasn't like the day before where they did an extended 2-minute drill where Joe Flacco threw 10 passes in a row. He wasn't missing much today. There wasn't much for him to do. So I think it's pretty easy to have him sit. I do think though that the thing that lends to the fact that he was sore is that on a light day he really didn't do anything with his right arm. So it definitely didn't feel great. I thought this was an interesting piece that we hadn't heard before. I want to get your thoughts on this. He said that their original plan when he had surgery was that they were going to try to get him ready for training camp, which they had not told us before. But that means that he was well ahead of the projections when the offseason workouts first started.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, because I remember right when the surgery happened, we asked Shane Steichen, like, would he be back for the offseason program? And he more or less said, well, I don't like to make guarantees, but that's the idea. I think that's what we were always going on. And I just think somewhere in there, they decided to just push it back. Like they have preached caution. Chris Ballard kind of made that his not new, but his offseason messaging at every stop was like, whatever they think is like a reasonable target, they're going to just push it back, just be a little bit more cautious. And so I think though, like reading between it, I think it's one of those where they thought he could do the offseason program and he should, or they're hopeful he can, but they're not worried one bit if he does, because training camp's got to just be the target. And so in their minds, like if as nice as it is to get out here and do this passing camp, as Jim Bob Cooter calls it, like unlike last year where like he's so new to the playbook and he's splitting reps with Gardner Minshew, there's still going to be a ton of reps to absorb in training camp, a lot of time to build up chemistry with these receivers. in a way that makes you just feel a little bit better about leaning into that caution a little bit. But it was interesting because it feels like, I don't know, feels like the target did move a little bit, and I don't know. It's just hard to figure. I don't know enough about the whole deal because he was cleared to throw again in February, and it's like here we are in June talking about how he's like supposed to throw in training camp. So it's just a process. I mean, you just got to think about how shoulders are complicated and just how much torque he's got to put on that and be able to play with no pain. And just some of the throws, like I think we just can take for granted just how much muscle and torque goes into the action that he does. And so I don't know. It's just hard to figure out much more than that, though. And until my big thing is just until I see alarm out of Anthony, who I think this is his entire livelihood in front of him. I'm not going to react too much to that, especially when what he's saying is what everyone else is echoing. And I think we would feel a different tone right now if there was legit concern. But it's fair to say that it's not no concern either, because obviously the ideal thing would be we didn't even talk about the shoulder. And it is annoying that we're still finding, different things are happening that get us to talk about that shoulder.
I do think that one of the mistakes that we probably make and that fans definitely make is just the idea that there's hard and fast endings to recoveries. And so I'm gonna make this case. I'm gonna try to make this case as concisely as possible. Like when a guy tears his Achilles tendon, the recovery time is often about 1 year. If he tears it in one season, he can usually play the next year. Dallas Flowers is ahead of that right now, so that's a little nugget. He's been essentially full go. He's a little ahead of where I would expect him to be. But usually it takes like a full year for them to get back in, and to get back into the lineup, and they can play. Like Eric Fisher played after his torn Achilles tendon. Dio Dengbo played after his torn Achilles tendon. Marlon Mack, Julian Blackman. We've had a bunch of these over the last couple of years. But then when we talk to them after the season or halfway through the season, if they're struggling, like Eric Fisher was struggling in one, Marlon Mack didn't quite look like himself, they usually end up saying something along the lines of, I don't feel like I have all of my explosiveness back. Like, it's healthy enough to play. You're not necessarily healthy enough to be exactly who you were before the injury, is what they're trying to say. And so I think that maybe we should apply that to all surgeries, in that just because a player is back on the field or cleared, it doesn't mean that there's no residual lasting effects. I think that's what Richardson was trying to get at when he said that some days he still gets up and it's achy, or like right now it's sore. The way I think the quote he used was, we were kind of surprised we didn't have to do this until now. So there seems to be, like I said, we got to think more. You got to think more progressively about like how the injury goes, and there might be some stuff that comes up that you don't know after surgery. I will say this though, if we get to training camp and there's sore right shoulders and he's not practicing, my alarm level will go very, very, very high.
Yeah, same here. I will not answer the same way in training camp. To me, it was like, this just felt like the third day of the passing camp in June's, like, it's a throwaway day. Sometimes teams don't even have this day. But training camp is not going to be that. Like, it's not that every day is Armageddon, but it's like, if we're hearing about the injury that happened in October and we're in the middle of August, and it's just like, guys, we got 17 games to go. I mean, like, that's not going to be a good sign. But that's 2 months away. And I think part of what's setting me at ease too is that when you go back and look at it, when Anthony said, last time he talked, he said there would be soreness, that there would be days where it was going to, like, he pretty much set up exactly what they're saying now. It didn't feel like, it was a little jarring to watch that play out, just that he was out there for a first team and then it was sore. But the way it's played out has mostly been how he described it. And the way that I'm guessing happened is, honestly, I think he could have practiced today probably pretty fine when they said he could play on Sunday. Yesterday is the day it was sore. It was just kind of like a why bother, why mess around with it? Like this franchise is really dead set on not like messing up a recovery again with a quarterback. And so I just think like you see them do something that feels like extra, that's like really he needs the second day off in a row. Well, yeah, they're going to do it that way right now because they've been through this in the worst way possible, and they're going to course correct in the other direction, probably too far at times. But in this instance, it makes sense. But I agree. Like if we're getting in the same conversation with like 3 weeks to go before week 1, that's a different level of concern, and that makes you wonder like, does it go away? But I think we have a lot of time until we raise that alarm bell.
Yeah. There is a lot of time before training camp. We're still very far away from the end of July. Other off-season notations, things that stuck out to you from what you were able to watch. I know you were able to be out here for quite every practice, but what else sticks out from this period of off-season workouts we've just gotten through?
I think the biggest takeaway I had is, man, Adonai Mitchell can play. I mean, I don't know if he can play on Sundays yet, but like he can step out on a field with other veteran players, a lot more experienced players, and stand out and do it like each day pretty much. And so just coming out here and seeing him, like, just when you see him walk out there, you feel like he's a dude. He looks like a dude. And that matters when it comes to some of these individual matchups, as it's, he's trying to level up from college to the pros, and he went out there and he looked better than the corners he was going up against. And now we know that's not the Colts' strongest position, but it were just the things that they've described that they loved in his game. We got to see good flashes of. I thought, like, the way that he separates at the top of routes. Shane Steichen's been big on that. I noticed that quite a bit. Any of those red zone drills, he was always breaking free late. He is a really nice control of like his body. It's a big frame that he's like spinning in the air, catching some of these passes. Very sure hands. There are passes behind him that he just would kind of haul in. Just has a nice body control and separation in routes, and it looks like a dude who could do some things. And so I'm not making big predictions off of that because it's still different when you get into the actual like getting hit on the field and doing it in a game setting when teams are game planning against it. But if he can, it looks like a guy who can factor into their passing game this year. It was the feeling I got with Josh Downs this time a year ago. And then he ended up having a really nice rookie season and gave them, another target to where this isn't just Michael Pittman Jr. and nothing in the passing game. And it feels like if Adonai Mitchell can do some of this, this season, where just, be a red zone threat, be a guy later in the down who can get open and win. I just really trust Shane Steichen to be able to utilize a player who can meet the moment. And if they get that, any level of like extra players they can sprinkle in around Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. is a big, big deal. So I'm just impressed with Adonai Mitchell, hearing from him too, because the only time I'd talked to him before this was the day he got drafted, and he was not in the best mood because he thought he should have gone higher. And, there's that whole kind of firestorm that came with that of, Chris Ballard's rant about, the scouts talking about him. So it was like you didn't know. You wanted a good impression. So this doesn't mean he's going to make it, but like we could have gotten a bad impression. We could have seen those concerned scouts talked about. He could have looked not ready. I've seen that happen in the NFL, and it can be a sign of things to come. And so in terms of first impressions, I thought his first impression was about as good as you could make.
Yeah, the thing we don't know is how does he read defenses, that kind of thing. I don't think they're doing much of that out here. But like the athletic ability, you can definitely see why they drafted him. I think I'm going to throw an observation back that I think maybe happened a little bit more when you weren't here than it did this week. But I think Jelani Woods is a wild card at the tight end position. And who knows if he can stay healthy. He believes he's fixed some stuff with his hamstrings, with his tight hamstrings, but there was just enough. I saw enough in practices that just reminded me when that guy is healthy and right, he is very long and much faster than he's supposed to than a tight end is supposed to be, and it creates problems up the seam and over the middle. And for the most part, he was working with Joe Flacco when he was doing it, but I also saw some stuff with the starters. Like, he just seems like a wild card. And the second time somebody asked Shane Steichen about him, I felt like I could kind of see Steichen's wheels turning a little bit about, hey, what can we do with this tight end who can get down the field the way this guy can? I'm really interested to see what happens if he can get to training camp in the same spot he was right now, health wise. I just he's the tight end that gives you some upside to me. I don't know that anybody else on the roster as a receiver really stands out to me as like somebody who can be an explosive playmaker as a tight end. I think Jelani Woods can.
Yeah, I think he has the only skill set like that in the tight end room, which is a real mix of, blocker types and Colin Granson's that more like safety valve reliable type. In terms of that vertical speed or even just the explosiveness, like I think about Jelani Woods on screenplays, and Shane Steichen loves those, and he just didn't really have the right guy for it last year. And Jelani Woods, I mean, could be theoretically devastating on those plays. And so it is interesting that like Shane is when Shane's mind gets turning, you can feel it, because I remember asking him about Jelani at the end of last year, and he said, well, I don't know anything about him. Like, he's got to get healthy. I don't know. And now you see him getting excited for it. And honestly, like it's baby steps, it's small victories, but it's worth saying that like he went out here for 3 straight practices on those hamstrings that could never get healthy, and there were no concerns. And again, these are very light practices. But like you're stacking moments. I think it's good for him. Like, we want to get over certain hurdles with players who've had this lingering, and it's not thrilling that we're discussing Anthony's shoulder, but like I think 2 players that, and I'll throw this guy out there too as sort of my observation, is that it's inspiring that Jelani Woods and Juju Brents don't have those narratives heading into this summer break, because certainly Juju did last year, and we kind of just thought, well, he's got time off, but it never really went away for him. And he talked a lot too about retooling his body this offseason to be able to handle this. Both of those guys were in that same spot of like, we have to do something very different in our off seasons, or we're not going to be kind of built for the wear and tear here. And so this is as light of wear and tear as you're going to see, but it still was nice. Like I never watched them with a trainer, never saw them grimace. Like they look like guys out there. And I think when they're in that spot, when they're not dealing with an injury, you see why those guys were day 2 picks. I mean, those are 2 incredibly impressive players. And Juju for me is like, I ran into him at the 500. Every time I ran into him, you're just shocked at how long this guy is. He is a perfect fit for how this team wants to play outside cornerback. And there's a lot of questions elsewhere, in that secondary about, do they have the depth at corner? Do they have, is Jalen Jones going to be able to hold up? And I think I still have concerns there, the safety room. But like Juju Brents to me is like the key to, like, if there's we talk about like when Chris Ballard takes risks on positions, and once in a while it'll work out and we look foolish. Like, I was thinking about like what would be the route that would get us there. And I think the clearest one would be Juju Brents is just awesome this year. He's just over the injuries, and they have a legit outside cornerback that Kenny Moore, Julian Blackman can play off of. And so stay with Jelani, long way to go till we actually see it in like a real setting. But I thought Juju matched up well with players, and just nice to see him have no injury concerns, because that's the total opposite of last year at this time.
I'll throw another one out. I think everyone is. I've said this a couple of times already. I think everybody's sleeping on Josh Downs a little bit.
Yep.
He got a lot of work out here in the 5 practices that we saw. Everyone has kind of moved past him. They drafted Adonai Mitchell, and everyone's talking about Mitchell versus Pierce. I just think this is how I think it's going to shake out. I think your top 2 targets from a volume standpoint are Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. And I think Mitchell, Pierce, and Woods are sort of Steichen's explosive play guys. Those are the people he's going to find for explosive plays, engineer it that way. That's just kind of how I think this is going to go. I think it's probably a lot to expect that Adonai Mitchell to have like a Michael Thomas rookie season and catch 93 balls or whatever, 97 balls. And the other thing is, I think Josh Downs is pretty good. I think Josh Downs is pretty good in the slot. I think he gets open really well, and I think Anthony Richardson trusts him. And so I think, we'll see where we are in training camp. But I wrote down the number one a lot on the receiving end of passes through the 4 days of practice that we got to see. It was really 5, but today very little happened.
I got to be honest, Josh Downs is one of the only players I've been around where you're heading into their second season, and I cannot think of a question I have about his game. Like the only thing is, like you said, he's not going to maybe be the most, the highest source of their explosive plays, even though I think there's more to that in his game than we probably knew. We saw that with Anthony. I think there is probably a little bit more they can unpack there. But the only, the size concerns to me, there was the whole thing about heading into the draft, and they never drafted a small receiver, and how would he hold up and how would he separate? He did it so consistently last year, as he's done so consistently at every level that he's ever played at. I really don't have any concerns with his game. The role he's in, playing slot receiver. Now, here's the thing. When Michael Pittman Jr. goes down, as we saw that Falcons game, he isn't a guy they're comfortable moving outside. I think he could run some routes from the outside, but he's not going to be that outside blocker. He's not going to demand, those coverages the same way. But as far as a guy who's going to be a slot player, I have zero concerns about his game, and not only that, but I'm baking him in. So it's such a viable piece. I just think he's got some of the most natural football skills I've ever seen in a young player. Just as far as immediately understanding routes and positioning, zone, when he's playing zone or man, his catch radius is much larger than you think because he plays well off of his feet, and his hands are. You're shocked if you ever see a ball go off Josh Downs' hands. And so I'm not trying to put him in some superstar category because, his size does it keeps him as sort of limited as one thing. He's a slot player, and he's, there's maybe
he's a high volume, move the chains,
high volume slot receiver. So but that's valuable. That's really valuable in an offense that for years here, it's hard to find volume in this passing game that's not Michael Pittman Jr. Since I got here, that pretty much hasn't existed until Josh Downs filled it. And the thing is, last year, his production tapered off a little later in the year. I think some of that was a respect thing. Some of that was their whole passing game tapered off the longer they played with the backup. And some of that was he was slowed a little bit by the knee. But I'm actually quite as impressed with the fact that he played all 17 games with that knee that developed kind of early on. He just has a way of he just feels like he has staying power. He's been such a high volume player at all three levels of football he's played at so far. And those injuries, any of the concerns you had about size, those seem to be more he does really feel like the outlier to me in terms of I just haven't seen that affect his game so far. And so if you get that player out on the field, I think he's going to be a huge piece. Anthony Richardson, comfortable and confident in all the areas we're asking him to develop as a passer, the sort of short range, seeing it quickly, getting the ball out. I think he's going to be a huge piece for Anthony this year. And it lets them – it's really nice to have right now when you don't know where Pierce and Mitchell are going to – who's going to take the lead and how explosive could it be and how long will AD take to hit that level. It's so nice to have – and same thing with tight ends. You need that guy in the middle of the field. I don't know if Jelani Wood's going to be out there. I feel very confident that Josh Downs is going to be Josh Downs.
Yeah, I think the other thing is just I think this offense is going to have a lot of RPO and a lot of quick throws around all the explosive shots they're going to take. That's where Downs wins. And that's where I think the volume comes from. Okay, now we've talked a lot about the offense. It's a passing game camp. Who's your standout on defense? And the hard part here is we didn't get to see Leato Latu do very much. We didn't get to see – they had a good period yesterday in 11 on 11, but you just don't know because they're not doing pads. I talked to Charlie Partridge today, and he said there's not really anything. But, because there's just one piece that's just missing. But defensively, did you have anybody that stood out from what you saw?
I'm going to struggle with this because I feel like my focus, like once that arm stuff happened with Anthony, I was just like glued on his every movement. So, and defense, I just think is a little hard to read in this. So I mentioned, but what I'll throw out there is I mentioned Juju as one. The other one I'll give just I don't know, like lukewarm recognition to is Nick Cross, and the fact that Nick Cross he's the guy that I think he's the guy they want to start there. Like when I tried to think, as much as we've talked through the whole offseason about why they haven't added at safety, why they've played their safeties the way they are, ultimately it comes down to, I think the front office always wanted Nick Cross to get to this position. It took a little bit of time for the coaches to believe in him again, to put him in this position, but they're going to ride it and see where it goes. And this is a different moment than he's had either of the past 2 years. In that the first year, it was almost like he got a little complacent. It was like they didn't have a strong safety. They just put him out there. He, didn't quite understand the urgency of NFL play. Last year, it was like the opposite. Like, you're not starting. You don't have a role. You need to develop behind the scenes a little bit and be this versatile guy. This year, it's like you have to win this competition. And if you do, you have a huge role in this defense as the starting strong, free safety. At a position that they've got to really nail to be a top tier team. And just the fact that he's kind of taken that he's been that top guy so far, in that he had an interception that ended practice yesterday, is sort of like, it's that thing. Like these settings, you always kind of see his downhill speed, you see his ball skills. It's like, can he put it all together? You're hoping this is the moment that, like, he's in his third season, he's played a little bit, he's not going to be overwhelmed, and hopefully he gets the urgency. And I don't know, it's more of a wishful thing because there's not as much tangible evidence in this kind of setting. But I think if you're in Nick Cross's shoes, you have to be feeling pretty good that, like, they're believing it's a nice position where they're believing in him in terms of they didn't go sign someone else. The spot is there, but yet it's not just handed to you either. There's a nice mix of belief and urgency around him right now that, I don't know, it'll be very interesting to watch in training camp because I'm still very high on the potential of Nick Cross as a player. I think it's been a weird path to get to this moment, but I do think for right now there's a decent amount of belief in what he can do.
So here's my one defensive note. I am not selling any of my Jalen Carline stock yet. In fact, I'm buying.
How much of that is related to the school he went to?
None.
Okay.
Not anymore. I just really like the way he looks in coverage. I really like the way he looks in coverage. He picked off Flacco in one session a couple days ago. He had a pass batted down on a receiver who was crossing. I like the coverage. And if I must say so, Ronnie Harrison has been playing more safety than linebacker. Yeah. If any linebacker. I don't know if I saw him play linebacker at all. So yeah, I'm gonna hold on to I'm gonna pick up a little more Jalen Carline stock. Let it simmer through the summer and see where we are in training camp. But I've got 57 written down as a guy to watch going into training camp. Now, obviously, we're not talking about like a massive role because you've got Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed there. I just think that, let's just put it this way, I can see why they drafted him to play linebacker. Like it's there.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, when you have Chris Ballard identify a linebacker, and then Richard Smith develop him, and then Gus Bradley build out his role, they hit on like everybody at that spot pretty much. So it's the safest proposition, even though it's a bit of a project. You're moving a guy to a position he's never played. But yeah, I mean, it looks like you just immediately see what they're going for. And that's why, like, what's interesting this time of year is, like, of course you don't want to overreact to this stuff and like act like we saw something out here that makes a guy a Sunday superstar. But like, I do think you can see the guys who can't play. And you find rookies sometimes who step out here and it's like, this is not, it's at least going to take time. And so it's always encouraging when a young player like Carlisle or AD Mitchell comes out. It's like, at least I can say, like, you look like a dude. I can immediately see why they drafted you. And then we'll see kind of how it comes together from there. And since you mentioned him, Joe Flacco, I'll just give a quick shout out. Like, dude can still rip it. I mean, it's
not only I would edit it this way. Not only can he still rip it, he's looking to rip it.
Looking to rip it.
The joke in the media corps yesterday was that Flacco's read, whatever it says on the paper, whatever it says on the play sheet, his actual read is deepest route to shortest route, based on what we saw. Like, Joe Flacco wants to push. Let's just put it this way: if Joe Flacco has to play significant snaps, the problem will not be that he doesn't want to throw the football down the field like Gardner Minshew. Polar opposite.
It is the total opposite. Anything like he doesn't really take the check down. He doesn't take the easy completions to like bolster the completion percentage. But my gosh, he throws it, and just a couple of his throws and like the one-on-one fade route drill was to the back of the end zone was just like you're just like, this guy's what? He's about to turn 40. It looked like he was 10 years younger. So it's just interesting in that, like, you bake that in the conversation about Anthony. There's going to be moments, the likelihood, even in a good scenario for Anthony, there's a likely scenario that Joe Flacco starts games this year. Now, you hope it's one or two. Like a 15-game season would be a good season for Anthony. But I do think at some point we're going to see Joe Flacco start at least a game. And I'm just going to be interested to see it. It'll be a different energy than I wasn't as excited to watch last year's backup as I am to watch this year's backup if he needs to step in, because like what you said, like it's not going to be like we're just going to neuter this and and just try and survive this backup quarterback. It's going to be like, no, you let your guard down. We are not. We are stepping it up and we're going for the throat. And you mix that with some of the talent they have, the skill spots. Like it can still be a very fun offense, even if the most important player has to miss a game or a series.
Well, and most importantly, I think unlike some of the teams he's been on, and maybe more like the Browns, Flacco wouldn't have to. In theory, Flacco's not going to have to worry about the pass rush as much. This is a good offensive line. Like the Browns have a good offensive line. I mean, Joe Flacco's going to throw interceptions if he has to play.
Oh yeah,
it's going to happen. But he's also going to take shots down the field that they didn't take last year. So, like I said, polar opposite play styles from the two backups. Yeah, if Richardson's arm feels good, I really want like a deep ball throwing contest in training camp.
Yeah.
I just want to see. Let's just stand on the goal line and see how far it goes.
We talked a lot of the positives. I was just going to say, are there any concerns you have out of this camp other than Anthony's shoulder?
Jalen Jones was on the receiving end of a lot of Adonai Mitchell's big play.
Yeah,
I'll just say that he made a couple of plays himself, but I think most of the time it was 40 showing up in those issues. So
yeah, and it's one of those like it was a concern coming in. I wasn't, it's certainly it's designed for the offensive player to have the advantage in these settings, but the coaching staff of the front office has just raved about Jalen Jones. They're putting a lot on him, but we'll see. We'll see, because I think that a year ago at this time, Rodney Thomas was in this spot where he was that 7th round pick who had a big rookie year. And it felt like, well, we unlocked something. And so that's like a free, awesome starter we have. And it didn't really go that way for Rodney once teams started to go after him, once the settings around him weren't quite as strong. Jalen's not coming from like as strong of it's not like he benefited last year from some great setting in the secondary, but it was, it was a limited role in terms of compared to what they want to do this year, which is start every game. So I do still have a few concerns there. And the other one I'd throw out there is, it's not a concern based on anything we saw, but it's like, man, AD Mitchell has stolen the spotlight from Alec Pierce in a big way so far. And it'll be interesting to watch that in training camp, but like Alec he got his foot stepped on last week, so he didn't participate in this camp. And, he was talking about how this has got to be his time to go out there and prove I'm more than just a run straight down the field guy. And it just feels like AD Mitchell is going to make that competition tough. And, training camp just becomes more important to Alec, who, he's got someone else nipping at his heels, didn't get to show anything really this spring. I'll be interested to see like how he takes the training camp this year, and if he can hold AD Mitchell off, because it just feels like one of those things where if AD Mitchell does what continues to look like he looked out this week, he's probably going to end up being the starter there. And you start thinking about like where production goes in this offense. They're going to run a lot. Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson. They're going to throw a lot to Michael Pittman. They're going to throw a lot to Josh Downs. And then if you add in AD Mitchell, and if there's a healthy Jelani Woods, like, Alec Pierce is going to have to bring it to like keep a role and keep production and keep keep relevancy. And it's just like, it's almost like the good things we're talking about in the rest of the passing game with Josh Downs and AD Mitchell and Jelani Woods, like that all kind of eats into what Alec is trying to also get for himself. So just curious to see how the pressure's up on him quite a bit this year.
He did have one of the practices. He did have 4 catches and some intermediate stuff. But, yeah, we only get 5 out here, so when you miss 3, you lose a little bit of it. I will say this. I don't think it's bad for the Colts to have 4 receivers.
No.
It's been a long time since I started covering the team in 2018. I feel like there's been a lot of times that they didn't really have 4 receivers. So that's kind of a good thing.
As you brought up, like they were so lucky last year. They had almost no injuries at wide receiver.
Yeah.
And so if they had just come into this year and we're talking about a couple guys and like one of them goes down for a month, like it is one of those things where like if Alec controls what he can control, to talk about bad cliches, like he's going to have moments and opportunities this year. It's just like those are becoming fewer. Now, I guess the flip side of it is the difference is last year he played all but 4 games with a quarterback who didn't throw down the field. And so the idea is like, yeah, he may have less of playing time in a role this year, but more of those splash play opportunities to still be a big time relevant player. I just think like the difference is their depth is so non-existent last year. And frankly, the year before that too, he was like bound to have a role. He's not bound to have a role this year. He's got to really carve it out and make it work. And it's in a way that like he has to establish something that hasn't been established yet. So he's sort of like starting in the same place as AD Mitchell in terms of establishment, but doesn't have as long of a leash. So it's always interesting when players get into that spot of like kind of like a make it or break it year. That kind of feels that way for him.
That's it for the Colts Cover 2 podcast and for the Colts off-season workouts. I've been standing outside. We kind of have to do that with the way we do the podcast. The parking lot is very empty. It's a very symbolic parking lot here at West 56th. Time to break for the summer. Enjoy your summer. Enjoy your baseball and backyard cookouts and everything else. We'll be back for training camp before your summer is over. We'll be back for training camp, and that's all these observations we've made. I would say this stuff is fairly. This is a glimpse. This is just passing camp. It's not a lot of practices. When we get into training camp, then we'll get to really start stacking some information. So for the Colts Cover 2 podcast, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This is Nate Atkins. Have a wonderful summer, and we'll see you in July.